Israel is issuing new warnings to its citizens this morning following last week's attack on soccer fans in Amsterdam. Israelis now being told to avoid major sporting events in cities across Europe, including national soccer team's match in Paris this week. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez has the latest.
This morning, Israel issuing new warnings to its citizens following last week's attack on soccer fans in Amsterdam. Israelis told to avoid major sporting events in cities across Europe, including the national soccer team's match in Paris on Thursday. The government warning of planned attacks. President Biden and other world leaders condemning the violence in Amsterdam as a widespread anti-Semitic assault, with a pro-Palestinian crowd chasing Israelis, surrounding and beating some of them. But footage also allegedly shows Israeli fans attacking people and chanting anti-Arab slurs before the game. Meanwhile, after a year of failed ceasefire negotiations in Gaza, Qatar says it's withdrawing as a mediator until Israel and Hamas show seriousness about reaching a deal.
Today is not Israel that is standing in the way of a ceasefire and hostage deal. It is Hamas.
While a new UN report on the early months of the war finds 70% of those killed in Gaza were women and children. Israel rejecting the report's methodology, but acknowledges it's killed around 20,000 civilians, along with a similar number of Palestinian fighters who they say hide among the civilian population. Our team on the scene of this Israeli strike on a tent camp in the courtyard of a hospital. 3 people were killed, witnesses say. Mohammed fled here with her family from northern Gaza. Where do we go, she asks. No schools or hospitals are safe.
All right, that was NBC's Raf Sanchez reporting, and joining us now, Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, Michal Kotler-Wunsch, and we appreciate your coming on this morning. Just the soccer event in itself, the soccer event and others, but that especially, what do you worry events like this, attacks like this, tell us about growing anti-Semitism across the globe?
So while the pictures are shocking, I want to sort of premise that they should not surprise us anymore. What we saw in Amsterdam, what we witnessed there, in a premeditated attack that we know was planned in advance of the arrival of thousands of Israelis to a game, that were chased down and hunted down and told to stay in their rooms for the duration of the stay on the ground, is actually a part of what we have seen as a tsunami of anti-Semitism in the wake of the October 7th, 2023 massacre in the state of Israel and the raging multi-front war that has been targeting Israelis since and unfolding, as you know, in our region. What I want to say is that it is the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism when we mark 86 years to Kristallnacht, and the Kristallnacht moment of our time was that October 7th massacre. The question is really what happens after that moment, that Kristallnacht moment, that warning, if you will. And the very same anti-Semitism that fueled the atrocities and the war crimes and the crimes against humanity perpetrated just over a year ago is the anti-Semitism that fuels the responses to those atrocities, unleashing the genie out of the bottle, if you will, and mainstreaming the anti-Semitism of which the attacks in Amsterdam are but one manifestation. We would be remiss if we saw it as a single event. We have to be widening the lens, looking at the single kosher restaurant in Washington, actually the windows smashed of the char bar on the night of Kristallnacht, of a young child being grabbed on the streets of New York City from the hands of his father, visibly Jewish, ultra-Orthodox family, of protests in Chicago outside of a university actually calling for the murder of Jews, and so on and so on. Montreal, Toronto, Sydney, Australia. That is what we call this tsunami of anti-Semitism. We have seen the rise of hundreds of percentages of attacks of Jews or Zionists or anybody that supports the state of Israel over the last year.
So, Michal, certainly you just laid out about this rise of anti-Semitism across the globe, not isolated, of course, this one incident in Amsterdam. Tell us your concerns that it may only grow. We have seen far-right governments on the political parties on the rise throughout Europe. And here in the United States, the election of Donald Trump, when he was in office for the first time in those 4 years, hate crimes, including anti-Semitism, also rose. Is this a trend that you fear is only going to continue?
I'll say what it is that I think we should be very aware of, and that is that whether it comes from the extreme right or the radical left or the radical Islamists, anti-Semitism has one definition. It is the result of a very long democratic process, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, that enables to identify and combat all strains of what is an ever mutating virus. And you know, the hate that begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews, excuse me. The hate that begins with Jews just predicts what it is that threatens the freedom and the dignity and the liberty in all of the spaces in which we live. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition includes 11 examples, and any strategy, whether it's university or a national strategy in Europe, in the United States, or anywhere else in the world, that aims to identify and combat all strains of anti-Semitism, no matter where it comes from. As I said, the extreme right, the radical left, the radical Islamist, needs to be utilizing this definition that includes the demonization and the delegitimization and the double standards, whether of the individual Jew, barring them from an equal place in society, or from the Jewish nation state, that is the state of Israel, barring it from an equal place in the family of nations. Without utilizing that definition that includes this new strain of an ever-mutating virus, of a shape-shifting virus, that is anti-Zionism, that targets, ironically, non-Jews who just need to be either self-defined or identified as Zionists, believing in Israel's right to exist. Without utilizing that definition, we will not be able to succeed in identifying and combating all strains of this lethal hatred.
So, Donnie, we've had occasion all too often to speak about this subject since October 7th. Your thoughts seeing this today?
You know, there are two words that, there are two words that haven't been mentioned yet. Jew hunt. That's what this was. This was organized by taxi drivers and people. This was a pogrom. This was basically, let's go hunt Jews. And they hit them with bricks on their head. And it was violent. They kicked them. And this is a straight line back to what happens on our college campuses. When it is not dealt with here, when you have people saying from the river to the sea and Hamas is great, this is a global world. This is a small world now. Everybody's on social media. This needs to be dealt with across the country. And also, there always tends to still be, when it comes to Jew hatred, kind of like a butt or not really walking into it. The New York Times headline when this broke out was violence tied to soccer game prompts dozens of arrests in Amsterdam. No, it was not tied to the soccer game. It was tied to the going after and the targeting of Jews. You can say that, media. You don't, like, there's no buts. There's no gray areas here. And the final thing I want to say is just, you know, this is, and I think to Mikal's point, this is a global problem. This is not just a Jewish problem. This is part of jihadism that's around the world, and they want Western civilization. And guys, this is just something that has got to be dealt with head on.
All right, Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, Mikal Kotler-Wunsch, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on. If I could just add one word to what Donnie just said, I think it's very important. That pogrom that took place in Amsterdam, those were not pro-Palestinian protesters. Those are pro-Hamas, pro-terror, pro-jihadi protesters. And the reason that we know that is when there are hours and hours of footage of Palestinians being beaten by Hamas, a genocidal terror organization, we will not see them on the streets calling to free Gaza from Hamas or from the murderous Islamic regime of Iran, of which Hamas is but one proxy. And that is why Donnie's point, I think, is so very important, because it threatens all democratic spaces and places as well.
All right. Thank you very much for that.